The dining room has always been my pride and joy. The antique mahogany table for 12 that Harold bought at auction in 1972, the crystal chandelier brought from Prague in his youth, the Persian rug underfoot, all this created the atmosphere of refinement to which I had become accustomed over 40 years of marriage. Every detail of the interior had been carefully thought out. The antique silver candlesticks I inherited from my grandmother, the porcelain set from Dresden, the paintings in heavy gilded frames. Everything told the story of our family. I prepared tonight's dinner with particular care. Robert loved duck and orange sauce with rosemary, a dish whose recipe I had memorized in the early years of my marriage. Christina always praised my tiramisu, although I suspected she did so more out of politeness than sincere admiration. Nevertheless, I wanted this evening to be perfect. Family dinners had become rare after Harold's death, and every meeting with the children was special to me. I spent the whole day in the kitchen, carefully preparing each dish. In the morning, I went to the market for fresh produce. I chose the duck myself and carefully examined the vegetables for the side dish. I cut the rosemary from my own garden in the backyard, where Harold had once planted a small herb garden. The smell of fresh rosemary always reminded me of how my husband used to make me breakfast on Sundays, sprinkling this fragrant herb on my scrambled eggs. They arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, just as I had requested. Robert looked tired after a day at the investment bank, his dark blue suit slightly rumpled, his tie loosened, and faint shadows under his eyes. At 45, he was becoming more and more like his father. The same gray eyes, the same habit of adjusting his glasses when he was deep in thought, the same way of tilting his head slightly when listening to someone. Sometimes this resemblance struck me right in the heart. Christina, as always, was impeccable. A light beige cashmere sweater accentuated her slender figure. Pearl earrings shimmered softly in the light of the chandelier, and her light hair was styled into a neat hairstyle without a single stray curl. In 20 years of marriage to my son, she had never once allowed herself to look inappropriate. Even at home, as I knew, she was always dressed as if she were expecting a visit from the Queen. "Mom, how are you?" Robert kissed me on the cheek, and I smelled the familiar scent of his cologne, the one he had been using for many years. That scent always reminded me of his father. Harold also preferred subtle, classic scents. "Elizabeth, you look beautiful," Christina added, handing me a bouquet of white roses, neatly wrapped in expensive paper. "I hope we're not late." "On the contrary, you're right on time. Come into the living room. I'll serve an aperitif." The living room greeted us with the soft light of floor lamps and the cozy crackling of the fireplace. I had lit it especially. October evenings in New York already required extra warmth, and a live fire created a special atmosphere of home comfort. Robert settled into his usual chair by the large window, which offered a beautiful view of 72nd Street with its stately mansions and tall trees that were already beginning to turn yellow. Christina chose the sofa opposite the fireplace, carefully smoothing her skirt and crossing her legs at the ankles, as taught in etiquette schools. "Champagne or martini?" I asked, approaching the polished mahogany bar that once belonged to Harold's grandfather. "Martini for me," Robert replied, taking off his glasses and wiping them with a handkerchief. "With an olive, if you don't mind." "And you, dear?" I asked Christina. "Champagne, please. French, if you have it." Of course I did. I always kept a few bottles of good champagne at home, for unexpected guests or special occasions. I poured the drinks into crystal glasses that I had bought in my youth during my honeymoon in Venice. At the time, Harold and I spent almost all our pocket money on them, but we considered this purchase an investment in the future. And we were right. Over the course of 50 years, these glasses adorned hundreds of festive tables. Every item in this house had its own history, its own soul. The antique secretary desk in the corner of the living room was a gift from my Aunt Rosalind. The antique Chinese vase on the mantelpiece was a silver wedding anniversary gift. The painting above the sofa, a landscape of a Tuscan village, reminded us of the most romantic trip of our lives. 47 years ago, Harold carried me over the threshold of this house as his young wife. At that time, the house still needed serious repairs. Many rooms were half empty, and in some, the roof was even leaking. But we knew this was our home, the place where we would raise a family and live a long and happy life. To the family, Robert said, raising his martini glass. To the family, Christina and I repeated, and the crystal glasses clinked melodiously. The first half hour passed in the usual small talk. Robert talked about a new major project at the bank, something to do with real estate in downtown Manhattan, mergers and acquisitions. He spoke enthusiastically, gesturing with his free hand, and I was glad to see his enthusiasm. Christina shared the plans of the charity committee of the Children's Hospital, of which she had been a member for several years. She talked about the upcoming gala dinner, which was to raise funds for new medical equipment. I listened, asked relevant questions, and enjoyed their company. Such family gatherings had become rare after Harold's death. The children visited me, of course, but less and less often and in a more formal way. Before, they could just drop by for no reason, sit in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, and talk about little things. Now, every visit required prior arrangement, like a business meeting. When I announced that dinner was ready, we moved to the dining room. The table was set with the best china, thin porcelain with a gold rim, silver cutlery that I had polished to a mirror shine. In the center stood a low arrangement of autumn chrysanthemums, and around the edges were those same antique candlesticks with tall white candles. The duck turned out excellent. The meat was tender and juicy, the sauce moderately sweet, with a slight sourness of orange and a spicy aroma of rosemary. I served it with roasted vegetables and mashed potatoes with truffle oil. Christina really praised the dishes, but this time I noticed something forced and insincere in her enthusiasm. It was as if she was fulfilling a social role rather than enjoying the food. "Mom, how are things with the house?" Robert suddenly asked, carefully cutting a piece of duck. "Isn't it too hard for you to manage such a large household on your own?" The question came as a surprise and seemed strange to me. I was doing just fine with all the housework. A cleaning company came twice a week for a thorough cleaning. Juan the gardener took care of the small but well-kept area behind the house, and all the utilities worked properly. I had contacts for reliable tradespeople for all occasions. "I'm doing just fine," I replied, looking at my son in surprise. "What exactly is bothering you?" "Well, it's just that the house is really big," Christina interjected cautiously, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a living room, a dining room, a library, Harold's study, a kitchen, a basement. That's a lot of space for one person. "And a lot of responsibility," Robert added. "Heating, electricity, plumbing, air conditioning, security. If something breaks—" "I'll call a repairman," I calmly interrupted. "Just like I've been doing for decades when your father was away on business trips." "Of course, Mom," Robert quickly agreed. "We don't doubt your abilities. It's just, well, anything can happen. You could slip in the bathroom, fall down the stairs, and there would be no one around to help." "I have an alarm button," I said, showing them the bracelet on my wrist that Robert had given me last Christmas. "And I always have my phone handy, and my neighbors are nearby. Mrs. Cohen on the right is a very attentive woman." "That's good, of course." Christina nodded, but there was disapproval in her voice. "But still, what if the power goes out in winter, or a pipe bursts, or, God forbid, there's a fire?" I looked at them more closely. There was something in their eyes that I couldn't quite identify: concern, anxiety, or something else entirely. The words sounded right, but the music was off key. "I have the contact information for all the emergency services," I explained patiently. "The insurance covers any incidents, and the fire alarm is connected directly to the security service." "Yes, of course." Robert put down his tools and leaned back in his chair. "We're just very worried about you. You are the most precious and important person in the world to us." The words were absolutely correct, but something in the intonation made me wary. In 45 years of motherhood, I had learned to unerringly detect insincerity in my son's voice. It was the same tone he used as a child to explain a broken window or a bad grade. "Maybe you should think about, how can I put this, simplify your life?" Christina suggested very cautiously, playing with her pearl necklace. "Move to a place where professionals will take care of you." "Take care of me?" I asked, feeling irritation rising inside me. "What? Do I look like a helpless wreck?" "Goodness, of course not!" Christina exclaimed hastily. "You look wonderful, just wonderful. I meant, well, there are wonderful places where people your age live in complete comfort without worrying about everyday problems." "Nursing homes," I stated. "Not nursing homes," Robert corrected, clearly embarrassed by my bluntness. "Elite residences for active seniors. They offer a rich social life, round-the-clock medical care, a variety of entertainment, and you won't have to worry about me." I finished his sentence. There was a heavy, awkward pause. Robert and Christina exchanged a quick glance, in which something flashed that made me even more wary. It was not just marital understanding, but something more complex, something like collusion. "Mom," Robert said quietly, leaning across the table toward me, "we sincerely have only your best interest at heart, your safety and comfort." "My best interests," I repeated slowly, and got up from the table. "Well then, who wants tiramisu?" Christina called 3 days after our dinner. Her voice was especially sweet, which always made me wary. Over the years I had known her, I had learned that the sweeter my sister-in-law's tone, the more likely there was a catch. "Elizabeth, dear, I have a small favor to ask of you," she cooed into the phone. "Can I come over today? I want to introduce you to a wonderful woman. I think you'll hit it off." I agreed, even though a strange premonition was already gnawing at me somewhere deep down. Christina rarely came alone, without Robert, and she certainly never brought her friends along. In the 20 years we had known each other, this had happened only a couple of times, and then only on special occasions. They arrived at 3 o'clock sharp. Christina was dressed in an elegant dark blue dress and pearl jewelry, clearly preparing to make an impression. Next to her stood a woman of about 55, with short gray hair and piercing brown eyes. She was dressed conservatively but tastefully: a gray suit, minimal jewelry, an expensive handbag. She exuded an aura of professionalism and self-confidence. "Elizabeth, let me introduce you to Deborah Mitchell," Christina said as we settled into the living room with cups of coffee. "We met at a charity event last week and had such a wonderful conversation." "It's a pleasure," I replied, shaking her outstretched hand. Deborah had a firm handshake, not feminine, but rather businesslike, masculine. "Likewise," Deborah smiled. "Christina spoke so warmly of you. She says you have a beautiful home." "Yes, I'm lucky," I agreed, pouring coffee from a silver set. "I've lived here for almost half a century." "That's amazing." Deborah looked around the living room with professional interest. "Houses like this are rare these days. It must be expensive to maintain." Something in her tone made me wary. It wasn't the idle curiosity of a socialite. There was a hidden assessment in her question, as if she were estimating the value of the furnishings. "I manage," I replied curtly. Deborah works in a very interesting field, Christina interjected, and I noticed her eyes light up. Tell us yourself, Deborah. I'm the director of an elite residence for seniors, Deborah explained, holding her cup gracefully. It's called Golden Years. Perhaps you've heard of us? We're located in Connecticut, in a very beautiful place. I had indeed heard of the establishment. Several of my acquaintances had moved there in recent years. The place was considered prestigious and very expensive. I've heard of it, I nodded. And what brought you to us? Christina told me that you live alone in such a big house, Deborah said, placing her cup on the saucer with a soft clink. And I thought you might be interested in learning about the opportunities available to people your age today. What kind of opportunities? I felt a steely note in her voice. Life without everyday worries, Deborah replied softly. Imagine, you don't have to think about cleaning, cooking, or laundry. 3 meals a day in the dining room, a nurse on every floor, cultural programs, a library, a spa, and, importantly, socializing with people in your circle. My circle? I asked. Educated, intelligent people who have lived interesting lives, Deborah explained. We have former professors, doctors, artists, and writers living here. You'll find many like-minded people there. Christina nodded like a bobblehead, clearly pleased with the direction of the conversation. Sounds tempting, I remarked dryly, but I feel perfectly at home in my own house. Of course, Deborah agreed. Home is sacred. But think about the practical side. You're alone here if something happens. And we have round-the-clock medical care, a call system, experienced staff. Elizabeth, listen, it's really worth considering, Christina added insistently. Robert is also very worried. We're all concerned about your safety. Interesting, I thought. Since when did Christina start speaking for the whole family? What do my grandchildren think about this? I asked. Jason and Emily? Oh, Christina just beamed. They're totally supportive of the idea. Jason even said he'd help with the move. That was unexpected. Jason is 23, studying law at Harvard, and usually too busy with his own life to think about his grandmother's problems. And Emily, who is 21, only comes to our house for holidays and birthdays. They're coming this weekend, Christina continued. They want to talk to you about it in person. Meanwhile, Deborah continued her presentation, talking about the advantages of living in the residence. She spoke professionally and convincingly, but I was only half listening. I was more interested in Christina's behavior. She sat on the edge of the sofa, nervously fiddling with her pearl necklace and glancing at me from time to time. Her eyes showed impatience, as if she were waiting for me to say the cherished yes. You can look at our photos, Deborah said, taking a glossy brochure out of her bag. See how spacious our apartments are? And this is our restaurant, library, winter garden. The photos were indeed impressive. Elegant interiors, well-groomed elderly people at exquisitely set tables, smiling staff in white coats. Everything looked expensive and respectable. How much does it cost? I asked bluntly. Between $8,000 and $15,000 a month, depending on the size of the apartment and the range of services, Deborah replied without a hint of embarrassment. Plus an entrance fee, usually between $100,000 and $200,000. Christina choked on her coffee. That's quite expensive, she muttered. Quality requires a corresponding investment, Deborah replied calmly. But think about how much you spend on maintaining a house like this. Utility bills, property taxes, insurance, repairs, cleaning, a gardener. I think the amounts are comparable. She was right. Maintaining the house was indeed expensive. But it was my home, my world, my life. What happens to the property? I asked. If someone moves in with you? They usually sell it. Deborah shrugged. Why keep an empty house? It's better to invest the money or give it to your children in advance. Many of our residents do just that. They give their property to their family and use the proceeds to ensure a comfortable retirement for themselves. I looked at Christina. Her eyes sparkled with a special light, and her cheeks turned slightly pink. Deborah seemed to have voiced her secret dreams. Of course, this is a personal matter for everyone, Deborah added. But practice shows that this approach eliminates many problems, and the family receives their inheritance during their lifetime, which avoids tax complications. I see, I said. The conversation smoothly transitioned into a discussion of specific details. Deborah talked about the daily routine at the residence, medical services, and cultural events. She was an interesting speaker, and I had to admit that the place really did sound appealing. But something inside me categorically protested against the very idea. If you like, we can arrange a tour for you, Deborah offered at the end of the visit. See for yourself. Talk to our residents. Many of them had doubts at first, but now they can't imagine living anywhere else. Great idea, exclaimed Christina. Elizabeth, you really should see it, at least out of curiosity. I'll think about it, I replied evasively. When the guests left, I sat in the empty living room for a long time, thinking about their visit. Something about this story didn't add up. There were too many coincidences. Robert's sudden concern for my safety, Christina's chance acquaintance with the director of the nursing home, the grandchildren's willingness to help with the move. I went up to my bedroom and took an old photograph out of the closet. Harold and I moving into this house. We were so young, happy, full of plans and hopes. Outside the window was a garden that was still undeveloped, and the house was in a state of construction chaos. But we knew this was our home, the place of our love. Did Robert really want me to give up all of that? My memories, my familiar routine, myself. In the evening, Robert himself called. Mom, how did the meeting with Deborah go? His voice sounded impatient, which he couldn't hide very well. It was interesting, I replied cautiously. How did you know about the meeting? Christina told me. We're worried about you. What do you think? I think it's very convenient to shift the care of an elderly mother onto strangers. Mom, Robert exclaimed indignantly. That's not true. We just want you to be comfortable and safe. In a strange place among strangers? Among educated, intelligent people your age? He corrected, repeating Deborah's words almost verbatim. So the conversation had been rehearsed in advance. Robert, I said firmly, I've lived in this house for 47 years. This is where my life is, my memories of my father. This is where you grew up. Is it really so easy for you to give all that up? The pause lasted longer than it should have. Of course not, he finally replied. It's just, Mom, think practically. The house is huge and expensive to maintain. You could have a carefree life full of new experiences for a $200,000 entrance fee. It's an investment in your future, he replied quickly. And the house? Well, it can be sold. The money can be invested. You'll be set for life. There it was. Finally, he said the main thing. Sell the house. And what will happen to the proceeds after my death? I asked. Mom, what are you talking about? A false note of horror appeared in his voice. You'll live a long time. Answer the question, Robert. Well, whatever's left will naturally go to the family, to us, to the children. Everything became crystal clear. The house was worth about $4 million. Even after paying for the residence for many years to come, there would still be a decent amount left. And most importantly, they would get the money now, without waiting for my natural death. I see, I said. Good night, son. Mom, think about the offer, he quickly added. The kids are coming over this weekend. Talk to them. They're very worried about you. Yes, of course. They are worried. The weekend promised to be tense. Robert warned me that the whole family would be coming over for dinner on Saturday. Him, Christina, Jason, and Emily. A family council, as he put it. I spent all Friday preparing, even though I knew it might be the last time I would welcome them into this house as a gracious hostess. I cooked with particular care: lasagna, which Jason loves, a salad with pears and nuts for Emily, who always watches her figure, and a classic apple pie based on my grandmother's recipe. Maybe good food would soften what they were about to tell me, although deep down I already knew nothing would stop them. On Saturday morning, I was watering the flowers in the conservatory when I heard the phone ringing in Harold's study. This phone was on his old desk and was rarely used. Most calls came to his cell phone or the kitchen phone. I didn't rush to answer, figuring it was probably some kind of advertisement or a wrong number. But the phone kept ringing insistently. Finally, I put down the watering can and went to the study. The room always reminded me of my husband. His books on the shelves, fishing photos on the walls, the old leather armchair by the window, where he loved to read the evening papers. Everything here remained the same as when he was alive. Even the smell of his pipe tobacco still lingered in the air. I picked up the phone, but there was no one on the other end. I put it back and was about to leave when the phone rang again. This time I managed to answer it. "Hello? Mom?" Robert's voice sounded surprised. "Why are you answering this number? Why are you calling it?" I asked in turn. "I pressed the wrong button," he quickly explained. "I wanted to call your cell phone. Listen, we're leaving in an hour. We'll be there at 2. "Okay, I'll be waiting. And, Mom," he paused, "don't cook too much. We won't be long." It was strange. Usually when the whole family came, they stayed until evening. The children played billiards in the basement. Christina wandered around the house looking at antiques. Robert read in the library. Family gatherings were a tradition in our family. Half an hour later, the phone rang again. I was in the kitchen and didn't go to answer it. I let the answering machine pick up. But curiosity got the better of me. I quietly went up to the study and carefully picked up the phone without saying a word. "Yes, I understand that the market isn't the best right now," said a familiar voice, "but the area is prestigious and the house is in excellent condition." It was Robert. He was talking to someone about selling real estate. "How much do you think it's worth?" my son continued. The man's voice on the other end was hard to hear, but I made out a few words. 4 million, maybe 4 too. "I see," said Robert. "And how long does it usually take to sell such a property?" "Depends on the price. From 3 to 6 months." "Okay, but this is only a preliminary consultation. We still need to convince the owner." My heart skipped a beat. The owner was me. "I understand," came a laugh from the other end. "Older people are often attached to their homes, but we can usually work something out, especially if it means moving to a nice place." "Yes, we're working on that," Robert agreed. "We'll have the final discussion today. I hope Mom will finally understand that this is the best solution for everyone. Good luck, and remember, the sooner you decide, the better the price." "I'll be sure to contact you on Monday," Robert promised. The conversation ended. I carefully put down the phone, trying not to make a sound. My hands were shaking and my throat was dry. So they had already consulted with a realtor. They had already discussed prices and terms, and they were telling me fairy tales about care and safety. I went down to the kitchen and mechanically continued to prepare lunch, but my thoughts were confused and my hands worked on their own. Convince the owner. The best solution for everyone. The sooner, the better. Each phrase hit me like a slap in the face. They arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. Jason had grown over the past few months. Now he was taller than his father, a broad-shouldered and confident young man. His dark hair was neatly styled. He wore an expensive cashmere sweater and designer jeans. He exuded an aura of success. He was clearly used to getting what he wanted. Emily had changed, too. She used to be a modest girl in simple dresses, but now she was a real socialite standing in front of me. Her long blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup was flawless, and her clothes screamed expensive. She carried a handbag that probably cost as much as a mid-range car. "Grandma," she hugged me, exuding a cloud of expensive French perfume. "How are you? You look wonderful." "Hi, Grandma." Jason kissed me on the cheek. "It smells delicious. Lasagna?" "Your favorite," I confirmed. "Come into the dining room." At the dinner table, the conversation initially revolved around the usual topics. Jason talked about his studies at Harvard, his internship at a prestigious law firm, and his plans for the future. Emily shared her impressions of a recent trip to Paris with her friends, shopping on the Champs-Élysées, Michelin-starred restaurants, museums, and theaters. "How's the apartment situation?" I asked Emily. She was renting a small studio in Soho, which was costing her a pretty penny. "I'm putting up with it for now," she grimaced. "But I want something more spacious. On the Upper East Side, for example. The houses there are so beautiful." "The houses there are really expensive," I remarked. "Well, maybe an opportunity will come up soon." Emily smiled mysteriously and gave my parents a meaningful look. Robert choked on his wine. "What do you mean?" I didn't understand. "Oh, just dreams, dreams," Christina quickly interjected. "Young people, like to make plans." After the main course, the conversation finally turned to the expected topic. Jason put down his fork and looked at me seriously. "Grandma, my parents told me about the meeting with the director of the nursing home," he began in a tone he probably uses with clients. "To be honest, I think it's a great idea." "Really?" I feigned surprise. "What do you like about it?" "Safety," he said clearly. "Medical care, social activities. Grandma, you deserve the best at your age." "Isn't this house the best?" "The house is beautiful," Emily interjected. "But it's so big and old. I bet a lot of things break down." "Everything works fine so far." "But the house is from the 1920s, she insisted. "There's always something that needs repairing. The wiring, the pipes, the roof." I wondered how she knew the age of the house. She had never been interested in such details before. "Everything is kept in good order," I replied calmly. "But it's so expensive," Emily exclaimed. "And besides, why do you need so much space? 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms? It's uncomfortable for one person." "It's comfortable for me, Grandma," Jason said gently. "We all love you very much and want you to be happy. But let's face it, maintaining this house eats up a lot of money that you could spend on yourself." "On what exactly?" "Well, on travel, for example, on entertainment, on nice clothes, on anything that brings you pleasure." "Living in my own house brings me pleasure." Robert and Christina exchanged glances. Emily twirled her ring impatiently. "Mom," Robert finally said, "what will happen to the house after, in the future?" "What future?" "When you're gone," Christina said bluntly. "Sorry to be rude, but that's the reality. We'll get the house, but we won't be able to live in it." "Why?" "It's too expensive to maintain," Robert explained. "Property taxes, utilities, maintenance. We'll have to sell it." "What difference does it make whether we sell it now or later?" Emily asked. "It's better if you benefit from it yourself." There it was. Finally, they said what they really thought. "I see," I said. "So you've already decided that the house needs to be sold." "We've decided that you need to be taken care of," Jason corrected. "The house is just real estate." Just real estate. The place where I had spent my entire adult life, where their father was born and raised, where Harold and I had been happy for almost 40 years. Just real estate. "Grandma," Emily leaned across the table toward me, "at least agree to look at this residence. What have you got to lose? Time. One day, she insisted. Let's go there and take a look. If you don't like it, we'll forget about it. I looked at their faces. Impatience, poorly concealed greed, irritation at my stubbornness, and not a shred of genuine love or understanding. Okay, I said. I'll look at it. The relief on their faces was so obvious that it was almost offensive. Great, Christina exclaimed. I'll make arrangements with Deborah for next week. You'll see, Grandma. You'll like it, Jason promised. After lunch, they hurriedly got ready to leave. Jason had a meeting with friends, and Emily had some business to attend to. Only Christina stayed behind to help me clear the table. Elizabeth, she said, putting the plates in the dishwasher, you're making the right decision. This house is too much responsibility for a woman your age. Maybe. She suddenly perked up. I was thinking, when the house sells, maybe it's worth investing some of the money in the children's education. Jason still has his master's degree ahead of him, and Emily has plans for the future, too. What plans? Well, she wants to open her own boutique, or a gallery, something related to art. She needs startup capital for that. Oh, that's what it is. They've already divided up the money from the sale of my house. Of course, I agreed. Young people need help. After they left, I sat for a long time in the empty dining room, looking at the uneaten apple pie. The pie turned out especially well. The crust was crispy, the apples were sweet, and the cinnamon was fragrant, but no one really tasted it. Everyone was in a hurry to finish the formalities and get down to the main conversation. In the evening, I went up to my bedroom and opened the window. The October air was fresh and cool. Down below, on 72nd Street, the streetlights were on, illuminating my neighbors' stately mansions. Music was playing somewhere, probably at someone's party. Life went on as usual. I took an old photograph out of my bedside table, our wedding portrait with Harold. We were so young, full of hopes and plans. He promised me then that we would be happy for the rest of our days. And we were happy. But now he's gone, and our only son wants to turn our house into cash. Tomorrow I'll call Deborah and arrange a tour. Not because I agree to move, but because I need time to think. Time to figure out what to do next. Because I wasn't going to give up just like that. The tour of the Golden Years residence was scheduled for Wednesday. Deborah met us at the entrance to an elegant three-story building surrounded by a well-kept park with paths and benches. The place really looked impressive. Modern architecture in a classic style, immaculate grounds, expensive cars in the parking lot. Even I had to admit that the residence made a pleasant impression. Christina, who insisted on accompanying me, did not hide her admiration. She took pictures of the interiors, asked a lot of questions, and kept exclaiming things like, "How beautiful," or "How luxurious." Deborah showed us several vacant apartments, a dining room with panoramic windows, a library with leather armchairs, and a spa with a swimming pool. She introduced us to several residents of the residence. All of them looked well-groomed, satisfied with life, and eager to talk about the advantages of their new home. So, what do you think? Christina asked as we drove back to the city. It's a nice place, I admitted honestly, but not for me. Why? She was clearly upset by my reaction. Everything there is designed for comfort: medical care, meals, cleaning, entertainment. That's exactly why. I don't want others to make decisions for me. I want to decide for myself what I eat for breakfast, when I get up, who I socialize with. But there's complete freedom there, Christina objected. Deborah explained that no one is forced to do anything. Within the established routine, I reminded her, breakfast from 7 to 9, lunch from 12 to 2, dinner from 6 to 8, quiet time after lunch, lights out at 10 o'clock. Very free. Christina didn't answer, but I saw her lips tighten. She was clearly hoping for a different outcome. An unpleasant surprise awaited me at home. Robert was sitting in the living room, and next to him was an unfamiliar man in his 40s, wearing a dark suit and carrying a briefcase. They were discussing something animatedly, but fell silent as soon as they saw me. "Mom, how was the tour?" Robert stood up. "Informative. Who's this?" I nodded at the stranger. "Meet Peter Armstrong." Robert looked slightly embarrassed. "He's a real estate consultant." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Chandler." The man extended his hand. "Robert told me about your beautiful home." "Why?" I asked bluntly. "Well," Robert was visibly nervous. "Just in case. If you decide to move, you need to understand the market value of the property." "I haven't decided anything yet." Of course," the consultant hastily agreed. "This is just a preliminary assessment, so you can get an idea of your options." Peter Armstrong spent about an hour in the house, carefully inspecting each room, taking notes in his notebook, and photographing particularly valuable interior items. He behaved professionally, but I felt as if I were being stripped bare at an auction. "The house is in excellent condition," he concluded. "Considering the location, size, and historical value, I would estimate its value at $3,800,000 to $4,200,000. "Not bad," Robert remarked, and I caught a poorly concealed satisfaction in his voice. "Provided it sells quickly, you can expect closer to $4 million," Armstrong added. "The market is currently favorable for sellers of luxury real estate." After they left, I sat in the library for a long time, leafing through a book I hadn't read. My thoughts were confused, and numbers echoed in my head. 4,200,000 for the residence, 8,000 a month for accommodation. Everything had been calculated, everything had been assessed, everything was ready. All that remained was to get the stupid old woman to sign the necessary papers. On Thursday evening, Robert called and said that the whole family would be coming back on Sunday. "We have important news," he said mysteriously, "and we need to discuss something." "What news?" "You'll see. It concerns your future." I spent Sunday morning at church. I hadn't been to a service in a long time, but for some reason, I felt like going today. I sat in the back row, listened to the familiar words of the prayers, and tried to find answers to the questions that were increasingly tormenting me at night. Am I doing the right thing by resisting? Maybe it's really time to accept old age and shift the responsibility to others? They arrived at 2 o'clock, just like last time, but this time everyone was clearly in a combative mood. Robert carried a folder with documents. Christina carried a bouquet of flowers and a forced smile. Jason and Emily looked as if they were going to an important business meeting. "Grandma, we have great news," Emily announced as soon as she crossed the threshold. "What is it?" "Deborah reserved a wonderful apartment for you," Jason said. "It's on the second floor, overlooking the park, the one we looked at on Wednesday. I didn't ask her to reserve it. We thought it would be better to be safe than sorry," Christina explained. "Good places like that go fast." "And how much does the reservation cost?" "Just a $5,000 deposit," Robert replied quickly. "Fully refundable if you change your mind." We settled into the living room, and Robert solemnly opened his folder. "Mom, we've thought everything through and come up with a plan," he began in the tone usually used for business presentations. "A plan that will ensure you have a comfortable and carefree retirement." "I'm interested to hear it." "So, here's the deal," Jason said, taking a notebook out of his pocket. "The house is selling for $4 million. After taxes and fees, that leaves about $3,600,000. $200,000 goes toward the entrance fee for the residence. We'll set aside another $400,000 to cover living expenses for the next 4 years. That leaves $3 million net. And what happens to that $3 million? "It gets invested," Emily replied. "At a good interest rate, The income covers further expenses for the residents, and the principal remains untouched. Until I die, I clarified. Mom, don't say that. Robert frowned. You're going to live a long time. But when I die, you'll get those 3 million. Well, of course, he admitted. You're not going to leave your money to strangers, are you? I wasn't planning to, but who knows? Silence fell. I saw them glance at each other, trying to figure out if I was joking or serious. Grandma, Emily began cautiously, you do understand that this is the best option for everyone? You get care and comfort, and we get peace of mind about your well-being. And $3 million, I added. Money isn't the point, Jason protested. The point is your health and safety. How touching. And when do you think this move should take place? Robert opened his mouth, but Christina beat him to it. As soon as possible, she said firmly. Autumn isn't the best time to move. It's better to get everything sorted before winter sets in. So, within a month? Well, maybe a month and a half, Robert clarified. We need time to get the paperwork done, pack our things. I see. What if I refuse? There was silence again, but this time it was more tense. Mom, Robert said slowly, we really hope it won't come to that. What if it does? Then we'll have to take more decisive measures, Christina replied coldly. What kind of measures? Contacting Child Protective Services, Jason said, looking me straight in the eye. If an elderly person is unable to adequately assess the risks to their own safety, the law allows relatives to intervene. There it was. The threat was made quite openly. So, you're prepared to have me declared incompetent? Not incompetent, Robert corrected. Just in need of additional support, supervision. Grandma, Emily leaned toward me, and I saw something unpleasant, predatory in her eyes. Do you really want to take this to court? Do you really want this whole story to become public knowledge? What story? The story of how a stubborn old woman puts herself in danger by living alone in a huge house, Jason explained. The story of how a loving family tries to save her and she refuses their help. I looked at their faces. Robert looked uncomfortable but determined. Christina looked cold and calculating. Jason and Emily looked at me as if I were an obstacle that needed to be removed. I see, I said calmly. So this is an ultimatum. It's an offer you can't refuse, Christina corrected with a crooked smile. And how long do I have to think about it? Until the end of the week, Robert replied. We expect a final answer on Friday. What if I say no? On Monday, we'll contact our lawyers, Jason replied dryly, and the process will begin. I got up from my chair and walked over to the window. Through the glass, I could see my garden, the rose bushes that Harold and I had planted during our first year in the house, the old oak tree where little Robert loved to play, the bench where we spent our summer evenings. Okay, I said without turning around. I'll give you my answer on Friday. Mom? Robert came over and put his hand on my shoulder. We're really doing this out of love for you. I know, I replied. I know. After they left, I locked the door and leaned my back against it. My heart was beating so loudly that it seemed to be heard throughout the house. My hands were shaking and my mouth was dry. So, all cards are on the table. No one is pretending anymore that this is for my own good. $4 million. That's the real reason they care, and they're willing to do anything to get that money. The threat of going to Child Protective Services was not an empty one. Jason studied law and knew what he was talking about. In our country, elderly people often become hostages of their own families, especially when there is a lot of money involved. But I still have a few days to think about what to do next. I went up to my bedroom and took an old box of documents out of the closet. The will, insurance policies, bank statements, title deeds to the house. Everything was in order. For now, the The house belonged to me, and me alone. But there were only 5 days left until Friday. On Monday morning, I woke up with a clear head and a clear plan of action. I had hardly slept all night, thinking the situation through from every angle, and by dawn, I realized that there was only one way for me to win this game. If they wanted money from the sale of the house, they would get it, but not in the way they expected. The first thing I did was call my old friend, lawyer David Reynolds. We had known each other since Harold's time, when David was just starting his career and my husband was helping him with his first clients. Now he was one of New York's most respected lawyers, specializing in family law and inheritance issues. "Elizabeth," he greeted me warmly. "What a surprise. How are you? How's your health?" "My health is excellent, David, but I have family problems. I need advice, urgently." There was a serious note in his voice. "Of course. When would be a good time to come in?" "Today, if possible." "I always have time for you. How about 3 o'clock?" David's office was located on Park Avenue, in one of those stately buildings where every detail of the interior screamed expense and respectability. David greeted me personally, which was a sign of special respect. Usually secretaries handled such matters. "You look wonderful," he remarked, seating me in a leather chair across from his massive desk. "Now, tell me what happened." I told him everything, from Robert's first hints about moving to a nursing home to Sunday's ultimatum. David listened attentively, asking clarifying questions from time to time and making notes in his notebook. "An unpleasant situation," he summed up, "and, unfortunately, not so rare. How much is your house worth?" "According to the realtor's estimate, about $4 million. That's a serious amount of money. Enough to make people lose their heads." He leaned back in his chair and clasped his fingers together. "Elizabeth, what do you plan to do?" "Sell the house." "What?" he said in surprise. "But then they'll get what they want." "Not exactly. You see, David, I'm going to sell the house and buy myself another home. With the difference, I'll have a wonderful retirement, and they'll get exactly as much as I deem necessary." David nodded thoughtfully. "That's an interesting approach, but they could try to contest the sale if they can prove that you were coerced." "That's exactly why I need your help. Everything has to be legally watertight, no grounds for appeal." "I see. What are your plans regarding your will?" "I haven't decided yet. I may revise it radically." We talked for about an hour, discussing the details and possible risks. David agreed to handle my case personally and promised complete confidentiality. "One more request," I said as I got up. "Recommend a good real estate agent, someone reliable and discreet." "No problem. I know just the right person, Rebecca Stone. She works exclusively with luxury real estate, is very professional, and knows how to keep her mouth shut." Rebecca Stone turned out to be a woman of about 45, dressed conservatively and businesslike. We met the next day in a small cafe near my house. She immediately struck me as someone who knew her stuff. "Mr. Reynolds gave me a general idea of your situation," she said, sipping her coffee. "I understand that utmost caution is required." "Exactly. The family must not know about the sale until the last moment." "That's doable, but it will require some ingenuity. Usually, when selling luxury real estate, they arrange viewings, place advertisements." "Is it possible to do without that?" "Yes. I have a database of wealthy clients who are looking for housing in your area. Some are willing to buy without unnecessary publicity and value confidentiality. However, this may slightly reduce the price." "By how much?" 10 to 15% of the market value, but the deal will go through quickly and quietly." I agreed. 3.5 million instead of 4 is still a huge amount of money, enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. "Now, about the timing," Rebecca continued. "When do you need to close the deal?" "As soon as possible, ideally by the end of this week." She raised her eyebrows in surprise. That's very soon, but it's possible. I have a client, a businessman from Texas, who is looking for a home in Manhattan for his daughter, a student. He's willing to pay cash to avoid red tape. Perfect. Then we'll show him the house tomorrow. If he likes the house, we can sign a preliminary contract on Wednesday. On Wednesday morning, I was as nervous as a schoolgirl before an exam. The potential buyer, James Carter, was due to arrive at 11 o'clock. Rebecca and I met him at the front door. Carter turned out to be a man in his 50s, tanned and fit, wearing an expensive suit and a friendly smile. He spoke with a slight Texas accent and gave the impression of a man accustomed to making quick decisions. Magnificent house, he remarked in the hallway, looking at the antique chandelier and marble floor. You can feel the history. The inspection lasted about an hour. Carter carefully examined each room, asking questions about the utilities, the condition of the roof, and the heating system. He was particularly impressed by the library with its fireplace and Harold's study overlooking the garden. My daughter will be delighted, he said, standing by the window in the master bedroom. She's studying art history at Columbia University, so this setting would be perfect for her. What about the price? I asked directly. Rebecca quoted $3,600,000. That's acceptable to me, he replied without hesitation. If we agree today, I can make a deposit tomorrow and pay the full amount within a week. Cash? Of course, by wire transfer. I looked at Rebecca. She nodded slightly. It's a deal, I said. We spent the rest of the day at David's office, drawing up a preliminary contract. Carter made a down payment of $300,000, transferring the money from his Texas bank. The deal was to be finalized on Friday, the day I had promised to give the family my final answer. On Thursday, I started looking for a new place to live. Rebecca suggested several options, and one of them caught my interest, a spacious apartment on Fifth Avenue overlooking Central Park. The apartment was located on the 15th floor of a prestigious pre-war building and had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a spacious living room, and a separate dining room. It's smaller than your house, Rebecca warned, but the location makes up for the size. She was right. The view from the windows was breathtaking. The green canopy of the park, the lake, the city skyscrapers in the distance. The apartment was bright and cozy, and its good layout allowed for the most valuable items from the house to be placed there. How much? I asked. $2,200,000, plus about $50,000 for repairs and furnishings. Simple arithmetic. $3,600,000 for the house minus $2,300,000 for the new place. That leaves $1,300,000 net. Even if I live another 20 years, this money will be enough for a very comfortable retirement. I'll take it, I decided. Excellent. We'll finalize the purchase at the same time as the sale of the house, on Friday. On Thursday evening, I sat in my favorite living room and said goodbye to the house. 47 years of life within these walls, an entire era. Here I was, a young wife, a happy mother, a loving grandmother. Here Harold died, leaving me alone with my memories. But a house is not just walls and furniture. A home is the people who fill it, and these people showed their true colors. On Friday morning, I got up early and went through all the rooms one last time. Each one held a piece of my soul, but I no longer felt at home here. Too much hypocrisy, greed, and betrayal had permeated these walls over the past few weeks. At 10 o'clock in the morning, David, Rebecca, and I met at the notary's office to finalize the deal. James Carter arrived right on time with a briefcase full of documents and a respectable banker who was to witness the transfer of money. The procedure took about 2 hours. Signatures, seals, bank transfers. Everything went smoothly and according to the law. By noon, I was officially the former owner of the house on 72nd Street and the new owner of the apartment on Fifth Avenue. Congratulations on the successful transaction, Carter said, shaking my hand goodbye. Take care of the house. It's worth it. I will. And you take care of your daughter. She's getting a wonderful inheritance. When all the formalities were completed, I asked David to take me to my new apartment. I wanted to sit there in silence, to get used to the idea that this was now my home. The apartment greeted me with sunlight streaming through the large windows and absolute silence. There was no furniture yet, only built-in closets and kitchen appliances. But tomorrow, the things most dear to my heart from my old home would be delivered here. Photographs, books, Harold's favorite armchair, the silverware. I went to the window and looked out at the park. People were walking along the paths. Children were playing in the playgrounds. Lovers were sitting on the benches. Life went on, and now I was part of this new life. My phone rang in my pocket. It was Robert. "Mom, where are you? We got home, but no one's there." "I'm in town," I replied calmly. I had some important things to take care of. "What matters? And why aren't you answering the home phone?" "Because there's no phone at home." "What do you mean?" "See you in an hour. Come to Fifth Avenue, 112, apartment 15A. "Mom, what's going on?" "You'll find out soon, son. You'll find out soon." I sat on the floor of the empty apartment, leaning my back against the wall and admiring the view of Central Park. The November sun gently illuminated the bare trees, and in the distance, skyscrapers reflected the light in their glass facades. It was quiet and peaceful here, not at all like the house on 72nd Street, where every room now reminded me of my family's betrayal. The phone rang incessantly. Robert, Christina, even Jason, they were all trying to get through, demanding explanations. I was in no hurry to answer. Let them worry. Let them try to figure out what was going on. They had rushed me into making a decision. Now they would get it in full. At 3:30, the doorbell rang. The concierge warned me about visitors. As expected, the whole family had arrived. I got up from the floor, dusted off my skirt, and went to open the door. It would be interesting to see their faces. Robert burst into the apartment first, red with excitement and clearly on edge. Behind him were Christina in an expensive coat, Jason in a leather jacket, and Emily in a fashionable raincoat. They all looked as if they were going to a funeral. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" Robert blurted out as soon as he crossed the threshold. "Why did you give them this address? Whose apartment is this?" "Mine," I replied calmly, carefully taking their coats. "Yours?" Christina asked, looking around. "But how, when—" "I bought it this morning," I explained, hanging the coats in the hallway. "Come into the living room, although there's no furniture yet. You'll have to stand." They walked into the main room, and I watched their reactions with pleasure. Emily's mouth opened in surprise as she looked at the panoramic windows and the view of the park. Jason frowned in confusion, trying to figure out where Grandma got the money for such a property. Christina was clearly estimating the cost of the apartment and was horrified by the figures she came up with. "Elizabeth," she began in a trembling voice, "you couldn't have bought this apartment. You don't have that kind of money." "I do," I smiled. "I really didn't have it yesterday, but this morning it appeared. $3,600,000 is a very decent sum." "Where did it come from?" Robert asked hoarsely. "From selling the house." The silence that fell in the room was deafening. I saw the information sink in, the expressions on their faces change. First bewilderment, then understanding, then horror. "You sold the house?" Jason said slowly. "Our house? Yours?" I asked, feigning surprise. "As far as I remember, the house belonged to me, and now it belongs to Mr. Carter from Houston." "Mom!" Robert took a step toward me, reaching out his hands as if trying to stop me. "Tell me this is a joke. Tell me you're kidding." "Not at all. The paperwork is done. The money has been transferred. The keys have been handed over. Everything is completely official and final. Christina sank down onto the windowsill, clearly unable to stand. Her face took on a sickly grayish-white hue. But, but that's impossible, she muttered. You can't sell the house in one day. It's not legally possible. It is possible if you have a buyer with cash and a good lawyer, I replied. David Reynolds handled the transaction flawlessly. There are no grounds for appeal. David Reynolds? Robert clutched his head. You hired a lawyer? Against us? Not against you. For myself. To protect my interests from relatives who decided to dispose of my property without my consent. Grandma. Emily came up to me, and I saw tears in her eyes. Why didn't you tell us anything? We're family. Family? I looked at her closely. And family is the people who make plans to sell the house behind an old woman's back, who appraise her property without informing her, who threaten guardianship if she doesn't obey. We wanted what was best, Jason exclaimed. We were worried about your safety. You were worried about $4 million, I corrected him. No need to pretend anymore, Jason. The game is over. Robert began pacing nervously around the room, his hands clasped behind his back. It was a childhood habit of his. He always did that when he was in serious trouble. Mom, you don't understand what you've done, he said, stopping in front of me. This house was our family history. Your whole life with Dad was spent there. I grew up there. My grandchildren were supposed to grow up there. Your grandchildren? I asked in surprise. As far as I know, neither Jason nor Emily have children yet. But they will, he insisted, and they had the right to inherit the family home. They did, until their parents decided to turn their grandmother into a source of income. Christina finally found her voice. Elizabeth, you have to cancel the deal, she said in a demanding tone. Immediately. You acted on emotion. This decision cannot be considered well thought out. On the contrary, I replied, it's the most considered decision of my life. I spent 3 whole days thinking it over. But you do understand that we can challenge the sale in court? Jason interjected. Prove that you weren't in your right mind, that you were under pressure. Who pressured you? I asked with interest. You? Not us, he protested heatedly. Someone else, fraudsters who took advantage of your age. Jason, I said sternly, you're studying law. Tell me, what grounds do you have for appealing a transaction between a legally competent person and a legitimate buyer? He fell silent, realizing he had fallen into a trap. We have witnesses who can testify that your family forced you to move into a nursing home, Christina suddenly declared. Deborah Mitchell will confirm that you agreed to be placed in the residence. Fine, I agreed. Let her confirm it. Only I didn't move anywhere. I bought myself a new apartment and live on my own. Where's the coercion? But the money, Emily exclaimed. Our money, Dad's inheritance. There it was, finally. No more talk about my well-being and safety. Just the naked truth about money. That money was never yours, I explained calmly. Grandpa and I bought the house with our own hard-earned money. We maintained it. After Grandfather's death, it passed to me by law, and I had every right to dispose of it. But family, Emily cried, tears streaming down her cheeks, smearing her expensive makeup. We are your family. Family is those who love you for who you are, not for your money, I replied. And you've shown that you only love my property. Robert walked over to the window and stared at the park for a long time. When he turned to me, there was so much pain in his eyes that for a moment I felt sorry for him. Mom, he said quietly, do you really think we don't love you? People who love me don't make plans to sell my house, I replied. They don't consult with realtors behind my back. They don't threaten me with guardianship. We were afraid for you. afraid that I would die before you got your inheritance. It sounded cruel, but I wasn't going to spare their feelings anymore. They hadn't spared mine. Okay, Christina said, getting up from the windowsill. Let's say the house is sold. What about the rest of the property? Antiques, jewelry, paintings? What exactly are you interested in? Everything that was in the house. That's also family property. I took the most valuable things with me, I explained. Photographs, books, a few pieces of furniture. The rest will be sold with the house or donated to charity. Donated? Emily gasped. But there are millions of dollars worth of things there. Not millions, a few 100,000. And yes, I've decided to donate it all to museums and foundations that help the elderly. Jason clutched his heart as if he were having a heart attack. Grandma, you can't do that. It's our inheritance. Your inheritance is what I bequeath to you, I corrected him. And while I'm alive, I decide what to do with it. Christina's eyes flashed with anger. So you've decided to punish us, she hissed. For taking care of you, for lying to me, for seeing me as nothing more than a walking wallet, for being willing to put me in a nursing home for money. We weren't putting anyone anywhere, Robert protested. We offered the best terms. For a $200,000 entrance fee and $8,000 a month, and the bulk of the money was supposed to stay with you. What's wrong with children receiving their inheritance while their parents are still alive? Asked Christina. It's beneficial from a tax perspective. Beneficial for the children, I agreed, but not for the parents who lose their independence. Emily sat down on the floor and burst into tears. Big tears dripped onto her expensive dress, but she didn't care. I had plans, she sobbed. I wanted to open a gallery, buy an apartment, renovate it. With my money, I clarified. With family money, she cried through her tears. We're family. Family doesn't mean co-owners, I explained patiently. Everyone has the right to dispose of their property as they see fit. Robert sank heavily to the floor next to his daughter. He looked as if he had aged 10 years in the last hour. Mom, he said wearily, what are we going to do now? Work, I replied. Earn your own living. Build your own life. Don't count on someone else's death. But the children are used to a certain standard of living, Christina remarked. It's time to get used to it, or find ways to provide that standard of living ourselves. They sat in my empty apartment for another half hour, trying to find arguments that would make me change my mind. They offered compromises, promised to visit more often, swore their love and devotion. But it was too late. The masks had fallen, their true faces revealed. When they finally left, I was left alone with a stunning view of the park and a feeling of incredible freedom. For the first time in months, I could breathe deeply without fear of a catch. Tomorrow, I will start setting up my new life. I will order furniture, hang pictures, arrange books. But for now, I'll just sit on the floor and admire the sunset over Central Park. My sunset, in my apartment, with my hard-earned money. I hardly slept on my first night in my new apartment, not because it was uncomfortable. The hotel mattress was quite decent, but because my head was swarming with too many thoughts. The sounds of the city outside the window were different. Not the click of heels on the sidewalk of 72nd Street, but the soft rustle of tires on Fifth Avenue. Not the creak of old floorboards, which I had grown accustomed to over half a century, but the silence of modern construction. Even the air smelled different, not like the roses in my garden, but like the autumn coolness of the park. On Saturday morning, I woke up early, and the first thing I did was open the heavy curtains. The view of Central Park in the morning sun was so beautiful that it took my breath away for a moment. The trees stood almost bare, with only a few yellow leaves fluttering on the branches here and there. Paths wound between the hills, and in the distance, The surface of the lake glistened. People were already walking their dogs, jogging, and pushing their children in strollers. Life was in full swing, and now I was part of it. At 9 in the morning, the doorbell rang. It was workers from the furniture store. I had ordered the essentials the night before: a bed, a sofa, a dining table with chairs, a reading chair. Nothing superfluous, but everything was high quality and comfortable. The men worked quickly and carefully, and within 2 hours, the apartment began to resemble a living space. Next, a car arrived from my old house with my personal belongings: boxes of photographs and books, a few particularly precious items, clothes. I personally selected the things I really couldn't leave behind: my wedding portrait with Harold, his favorite Dickens volumes, my mother's pearls, the silver set we received on our 25th wedding anniversary. The rest remained in the house. Let the new owners do with it as they see fit. When the workers left, I began to put things in their places: photographs on the bookshelf, silver in the sideboard, favorite books on the most convenient shelf. Gradually, the apartment took on my character and became a home. By evening, I was sitting in a new armchair with a cup of tea, admiring the city lights that were coming on one after another, and feeling a strange calm. The phone was silent all day. After yesterday's conversation, the family needed time to process what had happened, but I knew it was the calm before the storm. Sooner or later, they would gather their courage and make another attempt. On Sunday morning, the silence was broken by a phone call. It was Emily, and her voice was tearful and plaintive. "Grandma, I didn't sleep all night," she began without preamble. "I thought about what happened, and I realized you're right. We behaved terribly." "I understand," I replied dryly. "No, really, we really only thought about money. But now I realize everything. Can we meet, talk normally?" There was such remorse in her voice that for a moment I felt sorry for my granddaughter. Maybe she really understood her mistakes. "Come over," I agreed. Emily arrived an hour later, accompanied by Jason. They both looked dejected and embarrassed. Emily was carrying a bouquet of white roses, my favorite flowers. "Grandma, forgive us," she said, handing me the flowers. "We behaved like selfish jerks." "Sit down," I said, pointing to the sofa. They sat down next to each other, and I noticed that they were both dressed much more modestly than usual. Emily wasn't wearing any expensive jewelry, and Jason was wearing a simple shirt instead of his designer sweaters. Apparently, they had decided to show that money wasn't important to them. "Grandma, we want you to know that we love you," Jason began. "We love you not for your money, but simply because you are our grandmother." "And we're ready to prove it," Emily added. "Tell us what we need to do to make you believe us." I looked closely at their faces. Their eyes were clear, their expressions sincere. If this was an act, it was very well rehearsed. "You don't have to do anything," I replied. "Just live your lives, without counting on my inheritance." "We will," Jason promised. "And you know what? I'm glad you sold the house." "Really?" "Really. There was too much of the past there. And now you have a chance to start a new life." I wanted to believe those words, but something inside me trembled with suspicion. They changed their tone too quickly, agreed too easily to the loss of millions. "Where are your parents?" I asked. "Why didn't they come with you?" "They're upset," Emily replied cautiously. "Especially Mom. She was really counting on, well, you know." "The money." "Yes, she had plans." "What plans?" Jason and Emily exchanged glances. "Well, she wanted to buy a house in the Hamptons," Jason admitted, "and a new car, and help us with our apartments. At my expense. At yours, but we now realize that was wrong." We talked for about an hour. The grandchildren talked about their plans for the future, now without counting on their grandmother's inheritance. Jason was going to get a job at a good firm after graduation, and Emily was thinking about working in a gallery or museum. It sounded reasonable and grown up. Grandma, Emily said before leaving, can we visit you? Not often. We won't bother you. We just want to keep the family ties. Yes, I agreed, but only when invited. After they left, I sat by the window for a long time, thinking about our conversation. On the one hand, my grandchildren had behaved sensibly and seemed to be sincerely remorseful. On the other hand, $4 million is too much money to forget so easily. My suspicions were confirmed that evening. Robert called and his voice was completely different, harsh and demanding. Mom, we consulted with our lawyers, he said without preamble. The deal can be contested. On what grounds? You weren't in your right mind when you made the decision. You were acting under stress and pressure from fraudsters. What scammers? Your lawyer and real estate agent. They took advantage of your age and caused you to have a nervous breakdown. I laughed, for the first time in many days. Robert, do you seriously think David Reynolds is a scammer? A man your father has known for 30 years? He was acting in his own interests. He received a large fee for quickly closing the deal. And how much did he get? It doesn't matter. What matters is that he wasn't protecting your interests. He was promoting someone else's. My interests were to dispose of my property myself. He helped me with that. Mom, you don't understand the seriousness of the situation. Robert's voice became threatening. We are filing a lawsuit to have the deal declared invalid and to have guardianship appointed over you. Guardianship? Yes, a medical examination will show that you are incapable of making sound decisions, and your behavior over the past few weeks is the best proof of that. I felt a chill run down my spine. The threat was serious. American law has mechanisms for compulsory guardianship of elderly people, and sometimes they are indeed abused. And who will be my guardian? I asked as calmly as possible. Me, as your only son, and the first thing I'll do is cancel this crazy sale. What about the money? It will be frozen in a special account until the court decides on your legal capacity. So that's what it was. If they can't get the money amicably, they'll try to take it by force, through the courts, through psychiatric evaluation, through guardianship. I see, I said. When do you plan to file the paperwork? Tomorrow morning, unless you come to your senses and withdraw the sale application. The application cannot be withdrawn. The deal is done. Then we'll see you in court. The connection was lost. I hung up and walked over to the window. The park was bathed in the evening twilight, the streetlights coming on one by one, creating cozy islands of light. Somewhere out there, in this peaceful world, families who truly love each other are walking together, and I was left alone with my $3.5 million and relatives who were ready to declare me insane for the sake of that money. But I wasn't going to give up without a fight. Tomorrow I would call David and tell him about the new threats. If they wanted war, they would get it. On Monday morning, I woke up to a phone call. It was an unfamiliar number, and a man's voice introduced himself as the assistant to Harrison, the lawyer hired by the family. Mrs. Chandler, we have a proposal, he said in a businesslike tone. My client is willing to drop the lawsuit if you agree to a voluntary medical examination. For what purpose? To confirm your legal capacity. If the doctors find you to be healthy, no lawsuit will be filed. And if they find me to be ill, then guardianship will be appointed on a voluntary basis without legal proceedings. I see. And who will conduct the examination? Independent specialists. A psychiatrist and a neurologist? Independent from whom? From all interested parties. I thought for a few seconds. The offer was a trap. They would surely select suitable doctors. But refusal would give them grounds to claim that I was afraid of the examination. All right, I agreed. But I'll bring my lawyer, and I'll require written conclusions. Of course, the meeting is scheduled for Wednesday at 10 in the morning. After the conversation, I immediately called David and told him about the new developments. It's a dirty game, he summed up, but we're ready. I have contacts with independent experts who will give an objective opinion on your condition. What if their experts say I'm incompetent? We'll request a second opinion, and I'm sure any normal doctor will recognize you as a perfectly healthy woman who has every right to dispose of her money. I spent the remaining 2 days before the meeting with the doctors in tense anticipation. My family didn't call anymore. Apparently, they were preparing for the decisive battle, and I was settling into my new home, buying small items for everyday life and exploring the neighborhood. Central Park turned out to be an amazing place. Every morning I walked along the paths, watching the birds, squirrels, and dog walkers. There was a special atmosphere here. People smiled at each other, children played in the playgrounds, and lovers sat on the benches. It was completely different from my old neighborhood, where everyone lived behind high fences and rarely communicated with their neighbors. On Wednesday morning, I put on my best suit, carefully styled my hair, and went to meet with the experts. David was waiting for me at the entrance to the medical center, a stately building on Lexington Avenue. Are you ready? He asked. More than, I replied, and we went inside to prove to my own family that I was of sound mind and memory. The medical examination went exactly as David had predicted. 3 hours of tests, questions, and examinations conclusively proved what I already knew. I am in perfect health and capable of making sound decisions. The psychiatrist, an elderly doctor with kind eyes, even noted that such clarity of mind is rare at my age. The neurologist confirmed the absence of any cognitive impairment. The conclusions were put in writing and forwarded to all interested parties. Robert tried to challenge the results, demanding a re-examination by other specialists, but his lawyer quickly explained the futility of such attempts. The official medical report was legally binding, and the court would not review it without good reason. A week after the examination, I received notification that the lawsuit to invalidate the transaction had been withdrawn. The family had given up, at least officially, but I knew the war was not over yet. There was too much money at stake to back down so easily. The house on 72nd Street was empty. Mr. Carter hadn't moved in yet. His daughter wasn't due to arrive from Texas until January, but it felt strange to drive past and see the dark windows in rooms that had once been full of life. Sometimes I would stop at the gate and look at the facade, trying to figure out if I regretted my decision. But no, there was no regret, only a slight sadness for a bygone era. My new life was gaining momentum. The apartment had settled in and become truly cozy. I bought beautiful dishes, hung my favorite paintings, and placed flowers on the windowsills. Every morning began with a walk in the park. I explored all the paths, got to know my dog-walking neighbors, and found my favorite bench by the pond with ducks. Money opened up amazing opportunities. For the first time in many years, I could afford everything I dreamed of. In December, I booked a Caribbean cruise for January. I had always wanted to see the tropics, but Harold preferred European cultural tours. In February, I planned a trip to Japan to see the cherry blossoms. In March, I planned to visit Italy, which my husband and I never had time to explore properly. I made a list of all the countries and cities I wanted to visit. The list turned out to be long: Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, Brazil, Argentina. I now had both the time and the money for all these trips. At 72, I was finally truly free. But most importantly, I was free from toxic relationships with my family. No one looked at my property with greedy eyes anymore, made plans at my expense, or lied about caring and loving me. The peace and quiet I had found was worth all the millions I had lost. In mid-December, the phone rang. It was Emily, and her voice was unusually sweet. Grandma, hi. How are you? How's the new apartment? Fine, I replied cautiously. How are you? Great. Listen, I was thinking, Christmas is coming soon. Maybe we could celebrate together. I can cook a festive dinner, invite the whole family. No, thank you. But why? There was a hint of hurt in her voice. We're family, no matter what. Emily, I said firmly, after everything that's happened, I don't want to see your parents, or you and Jason for that matter. But we apologized. We realized our mistakes. You realized you lost money. That's not the same as realizing your mistakes. Grandma, please give us another chance, she pleaded. We've really changed. Maybe, but I don't want to take any more chances. After that conversation, the calls became more frequent. Robert asked for a meeting to discuss everything like adults. Christina sent postcards with apologies and declarations of love. Jason showed up at my house, but the concierge didn't let him in at my request. They didn't understand the main thing. Once trust is broken, it cannot be restored. I've lived long enough to know that people don't change radically. They can learn to hide their true intentions better, but the essence remains the same. I spent Christmas alone in my apartment overlooking the snow-covered park. I ordered a ready-made dinner from a good restaurant and opened a bottle of champagne that David had given me as a sign of victory in a legal battle. There were flowers on the table, candles burning, and soft music playing. Was I lonely? Surprisingly, no. Loneliness is when you are surrounded by people who do not understand or appreciate you. Solitude is a luxury that few can afford. I enjoyed the silence, my thoughts, and my plans for the future. On Christmas morning, I woke up to a phone call. It was Carter, the new owner of my old house. Mrs. Chandler, Merry Christmas, he greeted me. I have a small request. Yesterday, a woman came by and introduced herself as your daughter-in-law. She asked permission to enter the house, saying she had forgotten some personal belongings there. And what did you say? I refused, of course. The contract clearly states that the house is sold with all its contents, except for the items you took yourself. But she was very insistent. I understand. If she shows up again, call the police. Okay, and she left a letter for you. Carter sent the letter by courier. The envelope was expensive, embossed with Christina's monogram. Inside was a sheet of paper with her sweeping handwriting. Elizabeth, I know you're angry with us, and in some ways you have every right to be. But do you really think we don't love you? Robert is your only son. Jason and Emily are your grandchildren. Do the mistakes we've made really outweigh our entire family history? Please think about it. Merry Christmas. Christina. I read the letter twice and tore it up. Beautiful words about family history and love. But where was that love when they were planning to sell my house? Where was the family history when they threatened me with guardianship? After breakfast, I put on a warm coat and went for a walk in the snow-covered park. The snow fell in large flakes, turning the city into a fairy tale. I met other lonely elderly people on the paths, probably also preferring the quiet of the park to the hustle and bustle of family celebrations. At the pond, I met a woman about my age with an elderly dachshund. We started talking, and it turned out that Margaret, as she was called, had also recently moved to the area after divorcing her husband. 40 years of marriage, and he took a mistress 3 times younger than him, she said, throwing a stick for her dog. He demanded half of the property and alimony. I had to sell the house and move into an apartment. How do you like your new life? You know what? It's wonderful. For the first time in decades, I'm living for myself. I travel, go to the theater, and meet up with friends. It turns out that marrying a selfish person is not the best way to spend your old age. We exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet next week. It was nice to meet someone who also chose freedom over a toxic relationship. January brought the long-awaited cruise. 2 weeks among tropical islands, warm seas, excursions, new acquaintances. I got a tan, rested my soul, and realized that life was just beginning. At 72, I had opportunities that I had never dreamed of in my youth. On the ship, I met interesting people, retirees who were spending their savings on pleasures instead of saving them for ungrateful heirs. A doctor from Chicago talked about a safari in Africa. A teacher from Boston was planning a trip to all the capitals of Europe. A businessman from California was buying a house in Tuscany. Why leave money to your children? He philosophized over dinner. Let them earn it themselves. We'll spend what we've earned on ourselves. I completely agreed with him. When I returned from the cruise, I found a stack of letters from my family. Robert wrote about how much he missed his mother and was willing to make any concessions to restore their relationship. Christina reported on her problems. Without the hope of an inheritance, they had to give up their house in the Hamptons and take out a mortgage on a more modest home. Jason asked for help with his tuition. Emily complained about the impossibility of renting a nice apartment. I threw away all the letters without even finishing them. Their problems no longer concerned me. In February, I flew to Japan. The cherry blossoms were even more beautiful than in the photos. Pink petals fell like snow, creating an amazing atmosphere of tenderness and beauty. I walked through the parks of Kyoto, admired the temples, and tried traditional cuisine. In one of the gardens, I met an American couple, Robert and Jennifer Stewart from New Jersey. They told a similar story. Their adult children were trying to force them to move into a nursing home in order to receive their inheritance. We sold everything and bought a house in Portugal, said Robert Stewart. We live there for 6 months of the year and travel the rest of the time. At first, our children were furious, but now they send us sweet letters and ask for forgiveness. And what do? We ignore them, smiled Jennifer. We have friends, hobbies, plans for the future. Why do we need toxic relationships with our own children? Their experience has further convinced me that I made the right choice. In March, while preparing for a trip to Italy, I received unexpected news. David informed me that Robert was trying to find other relatives who could challenge my legal capacity. It turned out that I had a cousin in California, my mother's brother's daughter, whom I hadn't spoken to in 40 years. Don't worry, the lawyer reassured me. Even if she agrees to participate in the process, there is virtually no chance of success. The medical reports and evidence are too convincing, but the very fact that my son is willing to involve outsiders in the fight for my money has finally killed off any remaining maternal feelings I had. That evening, I sat by the window, admiring the lights of Manhattan at night, and thought about my life. 40 years of happy marriage to Harold, the joy of motherhood, hopes for a family idyll in my old age, and in the end, a war over inheritance and complete loneliness. But you know what? This loneliness turned out to be better than a false family closeness. I have money, health, plans for the future, and complete freedom of choice. And most importantly, I have self-respect. I did not allow myself to be turned into an object for profit. Tomorrow I'm flying to Rome, the Colosseum, the Vatican, the Tuscan Hills, and new experiences await me there. And let my family get used to living on the money they earn. I made the right choice, and I have no regrets.